Redefining National Security, next on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs at UWM and Milwaukee Public Television present International Focus, a global magazine linking Wisconsin and the world.
Welcome to International Focus. I'm Robert Ricigliano, Director of the Institute of World Affairs at UWM. In the past decade, the job of managing threats to the security of our nation has changed profoundly. Once the province of planners seeking to counter hostile militaries, the security establishment must now concern itself with a broader constellation of threats. Non-state actors, resource scarcity, economic upheaval, the environment, and a host of other issues interact in complex and potentially dangerous ways. Increasingly, policymakers are coming to recognize the impact the lack of basic human security elsewhere has on national security here at home. To help us explore the changing security landscape and how we might best respond, we're pleased to be joined by Lorelei Kelly, Director of the new Strategic Security Initiative. Her professional background includes teaching at Stanford University's Center on Conflict and Negotiation and serving as Senior Associate at the Henry L. Stimson Center, a D.C. think tank. She also founded and led Security for a New Century, a bipartisan group that provides cutting-edge knowledge on foreign policy and defense issues for members of Congress. She's an expert on civil-military relations and completed the Air Command and Staff College program of the U.S. Air Force. She blogs at the Huffington Post. Lorelei, welcome to International Focus.
Thank you.
So I thought we would just start with the final exam kind of right up front. Sure. If we look back over the last decade, September 11th, 2001 happened, changed everything. We've been at war for 10 years now. Are we more secure now than we were before September 11th?
Wow, you do it with the final exam question. Actually, I think if I looked at this from a big picture, I'd have to say no. And if I can go backward through your question, I think one of the reasons is because people think that the world changed September 11th, but it actually changed 10 years prior to that when the Soviet Union went away in 1991 and dissolved, and with it went our whole post-war strategy of containment of threats. And we're in a world now where you can't contain threats. We have to worry about the safety of people, as you mentioned, within our own borders, but also across borders. And add on top of that, you have to worry about them at the same time. So we're getting all of this new information about threats. And I think the reason we're less safe is because we as a nation haven't had the fundamental recalibration and prioritization of our funding mechanisms and our actual policy tools to be able to deal with it very well. We're learning ad hoc now, and the reasons for that are the urgency required of us by our involvement in Afghanistan and certainly in Iraq as well.
So, Lorelei, in this period, though, you're saying that sort of the traditional mechanism of security in this military sense that we saw very clearly in the Cold War has changed, and partly because of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the defense budget, though, itself has increased 87%, I think, or more in this time frame. So if what is security has changed, but we seem to be spending the money in the same way, what's happening?
That's a really important question because there's a couple of dynamics at play here. One is that I think largely policymakers, this is a generational shift, by the way. People sort of 50 and 60 and over think one way. People whose formative years weren't marinating in the Cold War think differently. Certainly the millennials think completely differently. But that I think a lot of Americans and policymakers say the more you spend on defense, the more security you purchase. That's a fundamentally flawed assumption. And what's happened because of that, because we've prioritized military spending at the expense of all of these other ways of being present in the world or involving ourselves with the world or being engaged, we're really playing catch up across our other agencies, our diplomacy. We don't have a sense of diplomatic dominance like we do military dominance, for example, whereas in today's world, that's actually as important. Our own credibility is a source of strength just as much as hardware was 25 years ago. And unless we start to adjust and balance what we spend our money on, how we go about being present and influential in the world, I think we'll become less and less safe. The truth is, threats are distributed widely today. Power is distributed widely. We're never going to get it back. We're never going to be able to contain it. Decisions are never going to be made exclusively, in the White House or Congress. And it's my hope that the American public gets more involved in this conversation. And I think it has everything to do with how we see ourselves, not only as a nation going forward, but who we project to the rest of the world. And that conversation's ongoing.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about this conversation because it had been the norm in the Cold War era that national security was the province of people who were at the top of the policy-making community and government and in the military, and there was this, even this bipartisanship where even Congress was sort of stopped the debate when it came to external security issues. Yeah, stopped at the water's edge. But is that changing now? I mean, you're saying we needed to broaden this debate out, but is that possible now? Is there space for that?
Well, I think that's something that's a little bit alarming about the political divisiveness that's characteristic of American domestic politics right now. Is I think that probably 20 years ago, you would find that both Democrats and Republicans took this issue off the table because it's just too important. It has too much to do with our fate as a nation and how we spend our money. What's happened in this sort of continual combative news environment is national security is up for grabs to use as a bludgeon, just like everything else. That's really unfortunate. And in my view, it's the duty of a citizen to step forward and say, absolutely not. As far as this issue goes, we all know that we need to do things differently, and we need to talk about that as an involved community. And I think that with this new Congress, there's a wide open opportunity to do that. I have some hope, and I'm not convinced about the Tea Party yet because I haven't seen what they've actually come to the table with in Washington. I'm going to be watching that very closely. But it seems to me that if they want to be taken seriously as fiscal conservatives, they have to put the defense budget on the table. It's the one entity in our government, as you say, that takes up the lion's share of spending of what's called discretionary dollars, what we have available to us. And it's an agency that can't be audited. We're increasingly seeing the privatization of its functions, which we used to hand over to public servants in uniform, now are in these unaccountable office complexes outside of Washington, D.C. This is a huge problem for all of us because the more opaque and less accountable that system is, the harder it's going to be to bring it into a new, much different concept of security.
Well, what are you hearing from people in our militaries, in the different branches, in terms of how they are thinking about security and whether they see it changing in the same way that you do?
Absolutely, they do. I think the military, because it's the on-the-ground group of people that go in other countries and have been solving our problems for us, I think, there's two things I would say here. I've watched pretty much most of the hearings about Afghanistan over the last 10 years, or listened to them. Nearly every military officer who's a commander from on the ground comes back and in one way or another says, this problem has no military solution. We need a comprehensive strategy. I believe in our commitment to Afghanistan, but it can't ultimately be a military commitment. And what you've seen happen, this goes back to your earlier question, is all these responsibilities accruing to people in uniform without any discussion about it, without any planning about what the division of labor should look like in today's world. And because it's such a political hot potato, folks out in the civilian world and voters and politicians don't question it nearly enough. And what really happens is it hurts our military. What they need more than anything is competent, staffed, professional, non-uniformed wearing partners and people to work with in these situations. That's going to be the challenge of our national security establishment, as you say. But what's more important, I think, for citizens of Wisconsin and elsewhere is that security isn't a rocket science anymore. It's not. Our security is going to be better served by having a very strong and healthy infrastructure, a healthy population, an educated population. When you start looking at credibility and our ability to persuade as being as important as our hardware was a generation ago, that's where we're falling behind. And a quick story, I know the Marine colonel who helped write the National Security Strategy this spring, and he was responsible for the portion about health, infrastructure, and education. And I know that was revealing to him about how badly we're falling behind in those areas.
How badly we're falling behind in them within the United States, or within our ability, or with our ability to support those functions in the countries like Afghanistan?
I think it's both. I mean, both. Actually, I think that if you look at it as sort of these pillars of strength for a country to go forward and be innovative and take risks, health, infrastructure, and education are vital to that. And we have underinvested in that in this country. We've under-innovated. And in fact, that's also a big problem in Afghanistan. There's been a couple of reports out this week, in fact, that what we're still lacking is a comprehensive non-military strategy. And the people I know who are most effective in talking about this on the Hill very often have been in uniform, have been deployed, and now are coming back and still ringing the alarm bells of you can't solve this problem ultimately. You know, we've been dealt a pretty lousy hand in Afghanistan because Karzai is not a great, partner to be working with over there. But at the same time, there's some real spots of hope, like the achievements since the United States has been involved in Afghanistan come in the areas of education. Millions of more girls, for example, are in schools. Public servants are showing up for work every day, even in the South, in the dangerous areas. I have a lot of friends over there, and I hear from one extreme to the other about how the situation is going.
So this sounds like a very different conversation, though. If we have coming up on our break in a minute or two, but so if I'm in the military and I've just done a tour in Afghanistan and I come back, and maybe 20 years ago I'd say, we did a great job, we took this territory, or we captured this many people. Now you're saying I come back and I say, we're doing great in Afghanistan. 5,000 more girls are going to school in my area of operation than they did. That's. In other words, it just seems like almost a disjunction between how we might have thought about what was success from a security operation many years ago and what we think is success in a place like Afghanistan now.
Well, I think what people don't realize yet is what the military is involved with in a place like Afghanistan is everything from calling in coordinates to delivering babies. They are conducting armed social work. Whether we like to call it nation building or not, I know this is a hot potato issue in campaigns, but we have to start figuring out how to relieve them of these duties. I mean, I always like to think of a military as a really good insurance policy. You pay for a good one and then you plan to never use it. Right. How come we can't figure out how to do that as a nation? They should be doing far, far less. As public servants, they're wonderful role models in the sense that they believe in teamwork, they believe in internationalism, they believe in sacrifice and collective outcomes. These are the very aspects in our public conversation about ourselves as a nation that are missing. I think there's a reason we admire and respect the military so much. The conversation we need to have now is, where's that sense of service and gratitude about the rest of our society? We need to figure out how to have that conversation next.
Well, we can figure that out after our break.
Okay.
So we'll
a little
be back
problem.
Right, tomorrow. You have 30 seconds. We'll be back in just a moment here on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to International Focus. We're talking with Lorelei Kelly of the New Strategic Security Initiative about changing definitions of national security. And so, Lorelei, before the break, we were talking about changing that conversation, and I think you were talking about it in the sense of as a nation, how we have that conversation. Can you elaborate a little bit more about what you think we as a country, or we as citizens, what that conversation should be, and how we as citizens should be engaging with it?
Well, I think that one of the things, having worked in and around Congress for the last 13 years, one notable opportunity for all of us who care about this issue, but also the state of our own communities, is to start engaging much more closely with our elected leaders in Congress and elsewhere, but specifically Congress, because every revenue bill this country passes starts in the House of Representatives. It's not the Senate, it's the House. And very often these are the issues that they don't hear a lot about. And there's no organized group of people who act as sort of a trusted filter of information or a rapid response team, like, the University of Wisconsin. I think this state is a great laboratory, in fact, because I've never seen more universities per square mile, and you can't throw a rock in this state without hitting a university. Those knowledge resources really need to be brought to bear much more publicly in support of congressional delegations. For example, I saw on his website that Senator Johnson, the new senator, just came back from Afghanistan. Is somebody going in and talking to him about what he saw? What's the debrief for him? Can you bring some people in that have served in Afghanistan in a humanitarian capacity? Somebody who can talk about the need for a different kind of commitment to Afghanistan. There's all these opportunities now also because the House of Representatives and the Senate have new rules which are requiring information disclosure, transparency. There's new rules just this month, in fact, with Speaker Boehner, who's the new Republican leader, has passed new rules to open up the House. There's going to be committee hearings streamed live. There's going to be more time in the district. In fact, there's something like 21 weeks that members are going to be in their districts this year. That's a huge opportunity for people sitting here in Wisconsin to be influential in that conversation. But what I always encourage people to do is go in and simply establish that relationship, because I'm somebody who's seen the commercialization of the public sector get worse and worse, the capturing of the conversation in DC on policymaking by vested interests, very often privatized. This can't happen on issues like security and our community's health. At the end of the day, what folks who live in this state and other places need to understand is that the fact that you're a citizen and a voter and a constituent and maybe even a high school friend or live down the street or belong to the same Rotary Club, it vaults you ahead of all of those other interests standing in line in DC. And in a recent project, I've been working on the noise level coming into Congress. And it's not that members and staff lack information. What they lack is filters. And what they lack are credible validators of information, people they trust, and also the political space to talk about things and make them a priority. And foreign policy, peace and security issues, that requires somebody to create some venues back here for them to come out and just have a low stakes, get to know you. We want to help you. We want to support you. We want this country to be the leader of democratic, modern democratic representative systems. The United States has been that country its entire history. We want to stay there. And the truth is the kind of skills for credibility and influence and persuasion and relationship building that we need are things that Americans are really good at. I just think that we don't think of them as security assets.
Well, I was just about to go there with you, because I think for an average constituent, they might feel comfortable, if they feel comfortable talking to the Senator Johnson or any of the representatives in their districts about their jobs, or whether they're out of work or having difficulty in a job or raising their kids or education. But they haven't felt comfortable talking about national security or say Afghanistan. So if Senator Johnson's been in Afghanistan, he's probably been there one more time than most of the people he's serving, right? So how are they going to come off as saying, "Hey, I'm an authority on Afghanistan"? Is that talk to me about the kind of interaction you think people can have with their elected leaders?
Well, I think that there's different categories. Like most or a lot of people are related to folks in the reserves. Anybody who knows a civil affairs officer, people who know people who've been deployed multiple times. Not everybody can speak to this sort of big strategic picture, but I do think that one of the sort of pieces of lowest hanging fruit on this is simply to go into your elected leaders and say, hey, the world has really changed. I sense that this country is at a crossroads. We need to talk about that, and we want to make sure you feel the support necessary back at home to have this conversation with your peers, to vote on behalf of these kinds of really, be a change leader. be a progressive in the completely nonpartisan sense of how we are present in a different way, in a stronger way in the world today. I think that there's that big gateway, that this is all about our security. And then I think at the sort of tactical level, what's happening right now with the budget is an example of the way the old thinking is still present. The new budget chairman, who's actually Paul Ryan from Wisconsin, has put everything up on the table to be cut back to 2008 levels except the defense budget. Well, if he really thought about this in a systems perspective, he'd understand that that's probably the worst thing you can do for the military itself. The military keeps asking for better, non-uniformed types of policy tools, commitments to places like Afghanistan, prevention tools so we never have to go there in the first place. I think that one of the things people can do is go in and say, hey, the defense budget needs to be brought back to 2008 levels as well. Quit exempting it from everything, because as long as it's seen as this sacred cow, we're never going to have the conversation that we need. And the numbers don't add up. It's unsustainable. You can't dismantle Social Security, eliminate a lot of like child health programs, Medicare, whatever. You can't ultimately do that and be a strong country.
Well, that seems like something that people can begin to engage on, and it sounds like you're saying engaging is not necessarily informing; it's questioning, and raising issues. And something when you referred to before about this more holistic approach, there are proposals, for example, to take funding away from the United States Agency for International Development, for example. I'm guessing that's something people in uniform would say is not doing them any favors, because they need those folks to come and do the unarmed social work, if you will, that they're being asked to do as military people.
Right. I mean, that's part of the counterinsurgency strategy, is the requirements for what's been called a civilian surge. It's people not in uniform coming in behind, setting up infrastructure, setting up schools. You know, let's face it, in Afghanistan, government is a counterterrorism strategy. If we don't have that, if we don't have some kind of credibility and centralized rulemaking and participation by people, it's never going to be a stable place.
Well, what's interesting in that you raised the point about governance, and I remember reading that one of General Petraeus's advisors to the counterinsurgency strategy said that a government that's losing an insurgency is not being outfought; it's being outgoverned, and yet. One way that this changing sense of security may actually be helping people engage on this issue is people know about governance. I mean, we don't call it that locally, but people have that experience, right, of their local communities and their state and so on. That's an issue people can engage on, right?
Yeah, I think that's one of the largest untold stories of the deployments of our military in the last 15 years, is that these soldiers being sent out, these Marines very often being sent out in Iraq and Afghanistan, are calling on their skills as American citizens just as much as their skills on the shooting range. They're being set out to set up town councils. They're being set up to sort of be process engineers. It's another sort of esoteric academic term, but to go out and set up a way for people to participate and become stakeholders in their own destiny as people who live there and who are going to be responsible for the future. And many, and I know a lot of military who've come back and officers, and they really would love to have this conversation as a larger public, because everybody I know in uniform is there because they love this idea of service. And one of the things I think we as citizens don't do nearly enough of is create a safe way for them to come back and tell these stories of dramatic change. And we have a separation between people in uniform and politics for a reason in this country. That's why we've been successful as a democracy. On the one hand, on the other hand, I think it's really important to hear these stories from people who have served in larger public venues, asking hard questions, really talking about what it was on the ground that they were missing. A lot of people can do that. You can do that in small towns, you can do that in big towns, because there's now almost 1 million Americans who have served. But what I would do always is bring them in with a person who's served in a civilian capacity. That means as a humanitarian. Lots of humanitarians, thousands of Americans are in Afghanistan right now, but we don't account for them in the same way as we do people in uniform.
We have just about a minute left, Lorelei, and one of the things that constituents can do is hold their leaders accountable, and they talk about wanting to be successful. And maybe we can just end on this notion of how should we as citizens be thinking about what is success in a place like Afghanistan?
I think in Afghanistan, what's going to look like success is going to be getting to the point where the security sector, meaning the criminal justice system, the police, their own military, is credible enough that the Afghan people tip toward trusting it and take ownership of it themselves. And so it's still an open question. And I know that at the end of the day, it's not going to be a military solution, but one of the things that we still haven't done is come at it with a comprehensive, large lens, looked at it regionally, talked honestly about the threat of Pakistan and nuclear weapons. None of this can be looked at in a box anymore. The borders are important, but the whole region is important to us. So we can't there's no all in or all out answer here. And the more that Americans engage in a questioning with their elected leaders, the more comfortable those elected leaders are going to be in seeking out really good, evidence-based decisions.
Lorelei Kelly, New Strategic Security Initiative, thank you very much for your time in International Focus. And to our viewers, we'll see you next week.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website.